I never thought I'd be one of those men, those guys who wake up one day to realize their wife, the woman they spent decades providing for, building a life with, has been lying through her teeth. But here I was, standing on the edge of my living room, phone in hand, watching the screen as my wife, my once loyal partner, tangled herself up with a man half my age. Let's back up for a second. My name's James Carter, 54 years old, owner of a successful car repair business I built with my own two hands. My wife, Emily, 50, has always been the good wife. Or at least, that's the story I'd been telling myself. Lately, things had started to shift. She was staying out late for book club, constantly glued to her phone, and smiling in a way that didn't feel like it belonged to me anymore. Most men ignore the signs. They lie to themselves. They believe in coincidence, she's just tired, or work's been stressful. Not me. When a man ignores his instincts, he sets himself up to lose everything. So, I started watching. And tonight, I found the truth. I installed a small camera in our bedroom 2 weeks ago, call it precautionary paranoia. Call it a gut feeling. Whatever you call it, it was the smartest thing I've ever done. At 8:32 p.m., while I was working late, Emily brought him into my home. My home. I watched in cold silence as they stumbled into the room, laughing. She kissed him first, she kissed him like she hadn't kissed me in years. It wasn't a moment of weakness. It wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. I didn't throw my phone across the room. I didn't scream or lose control. Control is power, and I wasn't about to hand any more of mine to her. Instead, I pressed record, capturing every second of their betrayal. Evidence. Evidence that I'd need to burn her life to the ground the way she thought she could burn mine. Let me say something about relationships, any relationship, really. A man has two choices, lead or be led. If you don't set the standard, if you don't draw the line, someone else will, and they won't do it in your favor. I gave Emily the stability she claimed she wanted. I gave her the house, the vacations, the respectability. But here's the truth most men don't want to hear, women crave chaos. Emotion. Excitement. They will risk everything, marriage, family, loyalty, for the thrill of breaking the rules. I shut off the recording, took a deep breath, and made a decision. Emily's actions had consequences. She would learn that tonight. There would be no crying apologies, no begging, no excuses like, I felt lonely or it was a mistake. She knew exactly what she was doing. The next few hours were a blur of planning. Strategic, decisive action, that's what separates a man from a boy. I gathered every piece of evidence I needed, the video file, text message screenshots I'd pulled from her phone earlier this week, and copies of our shared financial accounts. My next moves would ensure two things: she'd never humiliate me again, and she'd have no way back. By midnight, I sat in the car across the street from my house, watching their shadows move behind the curtains. Calm, focused, prepared. Men like me don't waste time on emotional outbursts. That's what they expect, weakness. But I was done being the nice guy. Tomorrow, Emily would wake up in a world where everything had changed. I'd make sure of that. I didn't sleep that night. Sleep was for men who could afford weakness, for those who accepted betrayal and hoped for meaningless apologies. That wasn't me. As I sat in my garage with a mug of black coffee, the cold hum of fluorescent lights above me, I thought about what I'd seen the night before, the two of them, my wife and her lover, in my house, acting like I was some clueless fool. Let me say something straight, when a man builds his life from the ground up, brick by brick, he doesn't let anyone come in and burn it down. Especially not a woman who traded loyalty for cheap thrills. By morning, I was ready. I didn't let anger cloud my judgment. I operated like a man on a mission, focused, deliberate, and without hesitation. There's something about betrayal that sharpens your mind, like a blade being pulled across a whetstone. At 7:30 a.m., I sat at the kitchen table, phone in hand. I pulled up the banking apps I'd been watching for weeks. Emily thought her personal savings were a secret. She'd been stashing money away, probably to run off with him, like some teenage girl in a soap opera. Her problem? I was 2 steps ahead. Every cent she'd hidden, every transaction she'd made, was sitting in front of me on the screen. I called the bank. Polite, professional. Within 10 minutes, every shared account we had was frozen. No access. No escape. Her personal account? Drained. I moved it to a secured holding account in my name. I earned that money. She didn't deserve a dime. Next, I picked up the landline phone, one of the few things I still kept around, and started calling the credit card companies. I cancelled every card in her name. Every single one. It wasn't enough to stop her, it was about watching her realize she couldn't make a move without my say. She thought she was in control. She thought she had choices. Women like Emily always believe they're the puppet masters, pulling strings and laughing at the man holding the bag. But here's the truth, and when a man stops playing nice, the strings snap. Around 9:30 a.m., I was in the garage again, packing up her things. Everything she owned, clothes, jewelry, her precious gifts, went into garbage bags. I didn't take my time folding or sorting. These were the belongings of a woman who'd taken my loyalty and treated it like trash. I was just returning the favor. The irony didn't escape me. These were things I'd bought for her. Anniversary gifts. Christmas presents. Vacations that cost me months of savings and years of hard work. Funny how meaningless they looked when you realized what they represented, a lie. I tied up the last bag, loaded them onto the porch, and waited. I didn't have to wait long. At 10:15, Emily's car pulled into the driveway, my car, technically. She stepped out in that smug, distracted way she'd been moving lately, phone in hand, her eyes down as she typed away. I could only imagine who she was texting. When she looked up and saw me, her face froze. Then her gaze drifted to the line of trash bags on the porch, the locksmith finishing his work on the front door. I watched it hit her. I watched the color drain from her face as she connected the dots. James? Her voice wavered, thin and weak, like she wasn't sure if she was awake or still dreaming. I stood there, arms crossed, calm as ever. Your stuff's here, I said. You not coming back in. Her eyes darted between me and the bags. What's going on? You know exactly what's going on, I replied. My voice didn't rise. I didn't need to shout. I know about you and your little boyfriend. I know about the money. I know about all of it. Emily opened her mouth, then closed it. She was quick, I'll give her that, but there's no talking your way out of a mess like this. James, let's talk about this. It's not what you think. I almost laughed. Not what I think? Do I look like a fool to you? I took a step toward her, locking eyes with her as she shrank back slightly. You threw away 30 years of marriage for what? A thrill? Some lowlife with nothing to his name? Well, congratulations. You've got nothing now, too. Her phone buzzed in her hand. I saw her glance at the screen, then shove it into her pocket, like I didn't already know who was calling. Here's how this works, I said. You take your bags. You leave. Don't come back here. Don't call me. Don't try to explain. You made your choice. You can't do this? I pulled the car keys out of my pocket, the keys to her car, and held them up. The car stays here. It's mine. You'll figure out another way to get around. And Emily? She looked at me, tears forming in her eyes now. You'll regret this. You'll regret every second of what you've done. I turned my back on her and walked inside, locking the door behind me. I didn't look out the window. I didn't watch her cry or beg. She wasn't worth it. This was just the beginning. I sat in my office at the back of the house, the blinds drawn to keep the morning sun out. The silence felt different today, heavy, satisfying, earned. Emily was gone. Her bags were on the porch where I left them, and by now, she'd either picked them up or left them for the trash. It didn't matter to me. What mattered was that she was out. I checked the time. 11:30 a.m. Plenty of daylight left to get to work. Some men would have sat back at this point, thinking they'd won. Changing the locks, canceling credit cards, and sending the wife packing would have been enough for them. They'd feel victorious because they stood up for themselves. But here's the truth most people won't say out loud: kicking someone out is just the start. It's not justice. It's barely even a punishment. Justice is making sure they can't rebuild what they destroyed. Justice is making sure the people who tore apart your life can't crawl out of the hole they dug for themselves. My first call of the day was to my attorney, Sam Parker. I'd known Sam for years. He was the kind of man who could find a loophole in a chain-link fence. "James," he said, picking up on the second ring. "Everything all right?" "Not really," I replied, my tone flat. "I need to file for divorce. Today." Sam paused. "That's sudden. Want to come by the office, Anne?" "No," I cut in. "Do it now. I'll email you the details." "I want her served today, Sam. Today. And I want everything locked down: house, assets, business. I don't want her getting a cent more than she's legally entitled to." "Understood," he said without hesitation. Sam was smart enough not to ask questions. I hung up and leaned back in my chair. Divorce papers were just the tip of the iceberg. Emily would know soon enough that her games had consequences. She thought she could disrespect me, betray me, and walk away unscathed. That was her first mistake. Her second mistake was underestimating me. At noon, I drove to my office downtown. My employees greeted me as usual, unaware that today was different. I walked straight to my computer and pulled up Emily's phone records. It was easy. She'd left her iCloud logged in on our shared desktop. Amateur move. The texts between her and her lover, Ben, were sickening. He wasn't just some fling. This was planned. They'd been meeting for months, in my house, in my bed, on days I'd been working to pay for the roof over their heads. "Don't worry about James. He's clueless. He'll never find out." I stared at that line for a long time, letting it sink in. I wasn't clueless. I was patient. There's a difference. Scrolling further, I found something else. Emily had been funneling money into an account I didn't recognize. It was under her name, but guess who had access? Ben. The two of them were plotting to drain my finances and run off together, probably thinking I'd be too broken to stop them. I smiled to myself. People always reveal their weak points when they think they are untouchable. Emily's weak point was her arrogance. She truly believed she was smarter than me. By 2 p.m., I was sitting across from a private investigator I'd hired a week ago. His name was Tom Grady, a no-nonsense guy with the kind of face that belonged on a wanted poster. "Appreciate you meeting me on short notice," I said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were copies of Emily's texts, bank transactions, and photos of her and Ben together. Tom whistled low as he flipped through the evidence. "You've been busy." "I'm just getting started," I replied. "I want everything on this guy: where he lives, who he talks to, what he does for a living. If he has skeletons in his closet, I want to know about them. I also want surveillance on Emily. I need to know where she goes, who she meets, and what she's planning." Tom nodded. "You looking to settle scores?" Something like that, I said, my tone cold. I didn't elaborate because I didn't need to. Tom didn't care about the why, he cared about results, and so did I. I paid him cash up front, stood up, and shook his hand. "You'll have your first report in 48 hours, he said. "Good. Don't miss a detail." On my way home, I stopped by the mechanic's shop I owned. My foreman, Kyle, was out back smoking a cigarette when I pulled up. "Boss," he greeted me with a nod. "What's going on?" "I need a favor," I said, tossing him a set of keys. "Emily's car. I want it stripped for parts by the end of the day. Sell what you can, scrap the rest. She won't need it anymore." Kyle grinned. "No problem." That car was the last piece of leverage Emily thought she had. By tonight, it would be gone, reduced to nothing but bolts and scrap metal. By 6 p.m., I was back home, sitting on the porch with a glass of whiskey. The new locks gleamed in the evening light. The bags were gone, which meant Emily had come and taken what little I allowed her to keep. I thought about her and Ben, wherever they were now. Maybe she was crying. Maybe he was comforting her, whispering lies about how everything would be okay. They had no idea. They thought I was done. They thought I'd kicked her out, taken my small victory, and walked away. But I wasn't done. Not even close. This wasn't about heartbreak or revenge. This was about justice. And justice was coming for both of them. The morning sun felt different this time, not warm or welcoming, but sharp and invasive. Like it was exposing everything I'd been blind to for so long. I stood in the kitchen, coffee in hand, watching through the window as life went on outside. Neighbors walked their dogs. Kids waited for the school bus. It struck me how normal everything looked while my life was crumbling into chaos. Emily thought she could outsmart me. That she could humiliate me, drain me, and walk away as if nothing happened. But what she underestimated was a simple truth: that when a man has been wronged, when he has nothing left to lose, he becomes someone entirely different. Someone dangerous. I wasn't done with her yet. By mid-morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Tom Grady, the private investigator. "We need to meet. Got something you'll want to see. Coffee shop on Main. 11 a.m. I grabbed my keys, slipped on my jacket, and left. The drive was short, but I used it to clear my head. I wasn't emotional, I couldn't afford to be. Revenge requires a calm, calculating mind. I wasn't going to let anger cloud my judgment. Emily and her boy toy would feel the full weight of their betrayal, slowly and painfully. When I walked into the coffee shop, Tom was already there, sitting in the back booth. His leather jacket looked as worn as the man himself. He gestured for me to sit and slid a manila folder across the table. "Morning, James," he said, his tone casual. "You gonna love this." I didn't reply. I opened the folder. Inside were photos, clear, high-resolution shots of Emily and Ben. They weren't just meeting in motels anymore. There were photos of them sitting in a lawyer's office, signing documents together. Another of them meeting with a real estate agent. "Looks like your wife and her boyfriend were planning ahead," Tom said, leaning back. "They're trying to buy a house together. Cash deal. That's why she's been skimming money out of your accounts." I stared at the photos, my grip tightening. The pieces fell into place. This wasn't just some tawdry affair. They were building a future together, with my money. My house. My business. My life. "How long until they close the deal?" I asked, my voice like steel. "Couple of weeks, maybe less," Tom replied. "She's in deep with this guy, James." I looked into him, too. Ben Carter's got a rap sheet a mile long: fraud, scams, unpaid debts. The man's a professional parasite. He's been using women like Emily for years. Gets them to fund his lifestyle, then drops them when they're drained dry. That explained a lot. Emily wasn't his first target, but she'd sure as hell be his last. Tom continued, he's got a small office downtown, legit on paper, but a front for his scams. You want the address? Send it to me, I said without hesitation. He nodded. What's the plan, James? I looked up from the folder and met his gaze. I'm going to take everything from him. His reputation, his future, and any illusion he has that he's in control. When I'm done, he won't have anything left, not even her. Tom smirked. I like your style. I paid for his coffee and walked out, folder in hand. On my way home, I stopped by the real estate office listed in Tom's report. It was a clean, upscale building in the heart of the city. I walked in like I owned the place, confident and calm. Hi, can I help you? The receptionist chirped, her smile practiced and polite. Yes, I said, setting the folder on the counter. I need to speak to whoever's handling the Carter deal. It's urgent. She glanced at the folder and then at me, hesitating. May I ask who you are? You may not, I said flatly. Just let them know that deal's about to fall apart. Her smile wavered. One moment, sir. I didn't have to wait long. Within minutes, a tall man in a tailored suit appeared. He introduced himself as Greg Mitchell, the real estate agent overseeing the sale. I shook his hand, gave him a firm look, and said, "You facilitating a deal for Ben Carter and Emily Thompson, correct?" "Yes, I am." "Why do you ask?" "Because the money they're using is stolen," I replied, holding up one of the photos Tom had given me. "And unless you want to be involved in a criminal investigation, I suggest you reconsider." Greg's expression turned pale. "Stolen?" "That's right," I said calmly. "I'm James Thompson. Emily is still my wife. Those funds are from our shared accounts, and I've already filed for divorce and frozen every asset. You push that deal through, and you'll be complicit in fraud. It's your choice." Greg swallowed hard. I need to confirm this." "Do what you have to do," I said, turning to leave. "But mark my words, this deal is dead." By the time I got home, I felt something I hadn't felt in days, a satisfaction. Ben and Emily thought they were clever, sneaking around, playing games. But their little world was starting to crumble, and they didn't even know it yet. I poured myself a drink and sat in my office, staring at the photo of them in the lawyer's office. They looked so confident, so pleased with themselves. That smug look on Ben's face? That wouldn't last. I sent Tom a message, get me everything on Ben's office. I'm going to pay him a visit. The thing about parasites like Ben? They thrive because no one ever stomps them out completely. I wasn't going to make that mistake. As for Emily, she'd learned soon enough that she'd chosen the wrong man to betray. Some men lose themselves when their world falls apart. They spiral into booze, drown in self-pity, and let the people who destroyed them get away unscathed. Those men deserve everything that happens to them. I wasn't going to be one of them. Emily and Ben thought they were clever. They thought they could rob me blind, humiliate me, and waltz into their happily ever after. What they didn't know was that their plans were already burning, and I was the one holding the torch. The day after I crushed their real estate deal, I got a message from Tom Grady. It was short and to the point. "Ben's office is dirty. You'll want to see this. Meet me at 3 p.m. Dirty. Perfect." I knew exactly what that meant, evidence. And with evidence comes power. Tom was waiting for me in the parking lot of a shabby, low-rent office complex on the bad side of town. The kind of place that looked respectable enough during the day but turned into a den of rats and lowlives after sunset. I parked, got out of the car, and walked toward him. "What have you got?" I asked. Tom grinned and held up a flash drive. Your wife's boy toy is worse than we thought. Inside that office, he's running scams, identity theft, wire fraud, laundering dirty money through fake businesses. I've got screenshots, transaction logs, everything. And Emily? Tom's smile faded. She's deeper in than you realize. I found emails. Ben's been using her as a front for some of the transactions. She knows what he's up to, James. Hell, she might even think she's his partner. The words hit me like a hammer. Emily, my wife, wasn't just cheating on me. She was working with him, hand in hand, to steal from me and ruin everything I'd built. Something shifted inside me. Any lingering trace of sentimentality died in that moment. I didn't care if she cried, begged, or screamed. She wasn't a victim. She was just as guilty as he was, and I was going to make sure she paid. Tom led me to the back of the building, where Ben's office was located. He handed me a set of keys he'd borrowed from the landlord. What are you planning? Tom asked as I fit the key into the lock. I glanced at him. Taking back control. The door creaked open, revealing a cramped, dingy office littered with papers, old computers, and empty coffee cups. It looked exactly like the kind of place a lowlife like Ben would run his operations from. I walked in, taking it all in, the fake business certificates on the wall, the filing cabinets that looked like they hadn't been locked in years. Start digging, I said to Tom. We're taking everything. We tore the place apart. Every file, every hard drive, every piece of evidence we could find, we took it all. I packed it into boxes, knowing that with this, I could destroy Ben's entire operation. And once his world started falling apart, Emily's would go right along with it. As we worked, I found a file with my name on it. I froze for a moment before opening it. Inside were printouts of my bank records, business accounts, even the deeds to properties I owned. This bastard's been planning this for months, I muttered. Tom glanced over my shoulder. They were going to bleed you dry, James. Take everything and disappear. Not anymore. I grabbed one of the computers and smashed it against the desk, watching it splinter into pieces. Tom didn't say a word, he just stood back and let me work out my rage. When I was done, I turned to him. Find out how to leak all of this, quietly, to the right people. Cops, media, whoever. I want him exposed. You got it, Tom said, tucking the flash drive into his jacket pocket. Before we left, I took one last look around the office. It wasn't enough to destroy Ben's empire. I wanted him to feel it, personally. I wanted him to lose sleep at night, knowing that everything he touched turned to ash. I spent the rest of the day preparing for the next move. I filed the evidence we'd gathered with my attorney. Sam was thrilled, he said it was more than enough to implicate Emily and Ben in financial fraud. What do you want to do with this? He asked. Use it, I said coldly. File whatever charges you can. And send a copy to Ben's clients, all of them. I want his reputation destroyed before the end of the week. Sam nodded, clearly impressed. You not holding back, are you? Why would I? By nightfall, I was back at home, sitting in the darkened living room, a whiskey glass in hand. I thought about Emily. I wondered if she was with Ben right now, plotting their next move, completely oblivious to the fact that I was about to drop a bomb on their entire lives. I picked up my phone and sent a text to Tom, is he at the office tomorrow? The reply came almost instantly. Yes. Regular hours. 9 to 5. Perfect. I sat back, swirling the whiskey in my glass. Tomorrow would be the day. The day Ben Carter realized he'd picked the wrong man to cross. The day Emily understood that betrayal comes with consequences. I wasn't just dismantling their plans anymore. I was taking back everything they stole, and then some. Let them laugh now. Let them think they'd won. By tomorrow, they'd know what it felt like to lose everything. The next morning arrived with a cold edge, like the air itself knew something was coming. I stood in front of the mirror, buttoning my shirt. My reflection looked different, colder, sharper, more deliberate. I wasn't the man I used to be. A betrayal like this carves something out of you, replacing softness with steel. I checked my phone. Tom's message was waiting. Ben's at his office. Alone. Good luck. Good luck. I didn't need luck. I needed results. I parked my truck across the street from Ben's shabby office and sat there for a moment, gathering my thoughts. This wasn't just a confrontation. This was an execution, not physical, but far worse. I wasn't here to throw punches, I was here to take everything that made Ben think he was a man. I crossed the street and entered the building. The office was quiet, with only a faint hum of fluorescent lights in the hallway. I pushed open the door to Ben's office without knocking. He was sitting behind his desk, a smug expression on his face as he glanced up. That smugness vanished the moment he saw me. "Morning, Ben," I said, closing the door behind me. His eyes flickered with recognition, then panic. "What the hell are you doing here?" I walked toward him, taking my time. "We need to have a conversation." He stood up quickly, knocking over a stack of papers on his desk. "You can't just barge in here. Sit down." He froze, realizing I wasn't asking. I could see it in his face, he wasn't used to being challenged. Men like him thrive on weakness. They prey on people too scared to fight back. Unfortunately for Ben, I wasn't one of them. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the stack of papers Tom had given me. Screenshots of his illegal transactions, lists of his fake companies, and photographs of him and Emily meeting with shady lawyers. I dropped them onto his desk. Ben stared at the pile, his face pale. What is this?" "This," I said slowly, "is everything you've been trying to hide. Fraud. Money laundering. Wire theft. You name it. You going to prison, Ben. It's just a matter of when." His hands trembled as he flipped through the pages. "You can't, this is real?" I finished for him. "It's all real. I've got copies of everything, and so does my lawyer. But I'm not here to let the courts handle it. I want you to feel this." I leaned forward, meeting his eyes. "I know about the house. I know about the money. You thought you could steal from me, use my wife, and just ride off into the sunset. Tell me, Ben, how's that working out for you now?" He dropped into his chair, slumping like the coward he was. "What do you want?" I smiled coldly. "I already took what I wanted." "The real estate deal?" "Dead." "Your clients?" "They're getting copies of all of this as we speak." "Your reputation?" "It's gone, Ben. You done. You just don't know it yet." I turned and walked toward the door, leaving him sitting there, defeated. But before I left, I paused and looked back over my shoulder. "Oh, and one more thing," I added. "Emily? She's going down with you. You thought she was your partner? She's just another name on the list of people you've ruined. Enjoy your time together while it lasts." I didn't wait for his response. I walked out, slamming the door behind me. The drive home was quiet, but my mind wasn't. Emily. She was next. When I pulled into the driveway, her car was parked out front. She was sitting on the porch, her face streaked with tears. For a second, I almost felt something, pity, maybe. But I buried it as quickly as it came. She didn't deserve it. I got out of the truck and walked toward her. She stood up, wringing her hands like a child caught stealing candy. "James, please," she started. Can we talk? I stopped a few feet from her, crossing my arms. Talk? Now you want to talk? After everything? Tears rolled down her face, but they didn't move me. I made a mistake, she choked out. I know I did, but it wasn't what you think. Ben, he lied to me. He used me. I didn't know. Stop, I said sharply, cutting her off. Don't insult me with your excuses. You didn't know? You signed the papers. You funneled the money. You lied to my face every single day. You knew exactly what you were doing. She shook her head frantically. No, James, please. I can fix this. We can fix this. I took a step closer, towering over her. You think this can be fixed? You burned everything we built. You threw away 30 years of marriage for a cheap con and a scam artist. Do you even understand what you've done? She opened her mouth to reply, but I wasn't done. I don't care what happens to you anymore. You're out of my life. Permanently. Go to Ben, see if he'll fix your mess. Spoiler alert, he won't. Her face crumpled as the truth hit her. She knew I was serious. I pointed to her car. Take your keys. Take your bags. And don't ever come back here again. James. Go. She didn't argue this time. She picked up her purse, walked to her car, and drove away. I watched her until she disappeared down the street. For the first time in weeks, the house was silent. Peaceful. I stood in the doorway, breathing in the stillness, feeling the weight of her absence lift off my shoulders. It wasn't over yet. Ben still needed to learn what happens when you cross the wrong man. But Emily? She was gone, and I wasn't looking back. I sat in my office that night, the house silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. The stillness used to bother me, it was too empty, too quiet, but now, it felt like peace. I could breathe without the stench of betrayal filling my lungs. Emily was gone, out of my life for good. But Ben? He was still out there, and as far as I was concerned, he hadn't learned his lesson yet. Men like Ben think they are untouchable. They lie, steal, manipulate, and walk away laughing while someone else pays the price. Not this time. Not with me. I opened my laptop and stared at the screen. Tom Grady had delivered exactly what I needed, dirt. Real dirt. Emails, transaction records, even fake identities Ben had used in his previous scams. It was all laid out, neat and organized. The kind of evidence that could bury a man 6 feet under, metaphorically speaking. But I wasn't just going to send this to the cops and call it a day. No, that would be too easy. Men like Ben deserved something special, a punishment so thorough, so calculated, that they'd spend the rest of their miserable lives wishing they'd never crossed me. The next morning, I paid a visit to Ben's clients. Not all of them, just the biggest ones. The ones whose pockets he'd been dipping into while flashing that crooked smile of his. The first meeting was at a high-end cafe downtown. I'd arranged it the night before through a mutual acquaintance who owed me a favor. 2 of his investors were waiting at a corner table, looking confused when I walked up. Gentlemen, I said, setting my briefcase down with a thud. Mind if I sit? One of them, a balding man in his 50s, frowned. Who the hell are you? The man who's going to save you a lot of money and even more embarrassment, I replied calmly. I opened the briefcase, pulled out 2 thick folders, and slid them across the table. What's this? The second man asked. Proof that your golden boy, Ben Carter, has been robbing you blind, I said. Fake invoices, offshore accounts, shell companies. It's all there. He's been siphoning your investments and laundering the cash for months. Ask yourselves, how long before he takes everything and disappears? They stared at the documents, flipping through the pages, their faces turning pale. I leaned back in my chair, watching the realization hit them like a freight train. If you're smart, I continued, you'll cut ties with him immediately. Call the authorities. Freeze his accounts. I've already sent copies of this to a few other people you might know, people who's been scamming behind your backs. The balding man looked up at me, eyes wide. Why are you doing this? What do you get out of it? I smiled faintly. Let's just say I have a personal interest in watching Ben's life burn to the ground. By noon, the dominoes had started to fall. Ben's clients were pulling out of deals, freezing accounts, and filing lawsuits faster than he could respond. I knew because Tom was keeping me updated every hour. Ben's office is in chaos, Tom said over the phone. He's running around like a chicken with its head cut off. People are showing up demanding answers, and he's got nothing. Good, I replied. Keep watching him. I'm not done yet. I wanted to savor this, watching his little empire crumble piece by piece. But there was one more thing I needed to do. That afternoon, I drove to Ben's office building. This time, I didn't sneak in the back. I walked right through the front doors, past the receptionist who barely looked up from her phone. When I pushed open the door to his office, Ben was on the phone, shouting. Papers were scattered across his desk, and his shirt was wrinkled like he hadn't slept. He froze mid-sentence when he saw me. Call you back, he muttered, slamming the phone down. What the hell are you doing here? I closed the door behind me and leaned against it. Just came to see how you're doing, Ben. Rough day? You son of a... Careful, I said, cutting him off. You don't want to add assault to your list of charges, do you? His face turned red. You did this, didn't you? The client's pulling out, the lawsuits, it's all you. I smirked. Took you long enough to figure it out. He lunged toward me, but I didn't flinch. I stood my ground, staring him down like the insignificant little man he was. You thought you could steal from me, ruin my life, and walk away? Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences? He stopped short, his hands shaking with rage. You have no idea what you've done. I'll fix this. I'll come back from this. No, you won't, I said flatly. You finished, Ben. Your clients are gone. Your reputation is dead. And by tomorrow, the police will have everything they need to put you behind bars for a very long time. His shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of him. Why? Why are you doing this? I stepped closer, lowering my voice. Because you took everything from me, my trust, my marriage, my dignity. And now I'm taking everything from you. You'll leave this town with nothing but the clothes on your back, if you're lucky. I turned to leave, pausing at the door. Oh, and one last thing, Ben. Emily? She's on her own now. Don't expect her to stick around when the cops come knocking. You're not worth it. I walked out, letting the door slam shut behind me. That evening, I sat on my porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. My phone buzzed with a message from Tom. Ben's clients are filing criminal complaints. Cops are involved now. He's done. I set the phone down and took a slow sip of whiskey. It was almost over. Ben's life was in ruins, and Emily? She'd learned soon enough that she'd backed the wrong horse. For the first time in weeks, I felt at peace. The storm I'd unleashed was still raging, but it wasn't mine anymore. And I wasn't done yet. I woke up before sunrise, the weight of unfinished business pressing on me like a stone. The destruction I'd unleashed was in motion, and by now, Ben Carter was choking on the ashes of his life. But I wasn't finished. There was still one loose end left to tie up, Emily. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the pile of documents I'd collected over the last few weeks, bank statements, text message logs, emails. Each page was a reminder of how deep her betrayal had cut. I picked up my phone and dialed Tom Grady. He answered on the first ring. "You're up early," he grumbled. "You find anything new on Emily?" Tom exhaled. "Yeah. She's holed up at her sister's place. Miserable as hell, if you care." I didn't. "Not anymore." "Anything else?" "She's been reaching out to people, mutual friends, some of your employees. Trying to spin the story, make herself the victim." I felt the muscle in my jaw tighten. Of course she was. That's what people like Emily did when the walls started closing in. They cried, they lied, and they begged for sympathy. "Send me everything," I said. "I want every message, every call she's made." "You got it." I hung up and leaned back in my chair, my mind sharpening like a blade. Emily was trying to manipulate her way out of the hole she'd dug, but this time, there'd be no one to pull her up. If she wanted to play the victim, I'd make sure the whole town knew the truth. By mid-morning, I was at my office downtown. My employees greeted me with wary nods, like they knew something was brewing but didn't dare ask. I walked straight to my desk, opened my laptop, and began drafting an email. The subject line read, "The truth about Emily Thompson." Inside, I attached the files, the text messages, the photos of her with Ben, the financial records proving she'd been stealing from me. I didn't write much in the body of the email. Just one line. "Sometimes the truth hurts. Share it as you see fit." I sent it to every contact we had in common, her friends, my friends, our neighbors, her book club, even our kids. Emily wanted to tell her side of the story? Fine. But she wasn't going to tell it without the facts staring everyone in the face. An hour later, my phone started buzzing with notifications. Texts from people I hadn't heard from in years. "Is this real, James? I can't believe Emily did this to you. She always seemed so perfect. What a snake." I ignored them all. I didn't need sympathy. I just needed results. At 2 p.m., my lawyer, Sam, called me. "James, we've got movement." "What do you mean?" "The fraud charges we filed against Ben? The police are acting on it. He's going to be arrested, soon. And Emily's name is all over those documents. They'll be questioning her, too." I smiled to myself. Perfect. Sam paused. "Are you sure you want to go this far? She's still your wife." "No, Sam," I said, my voice cold. "She stopped being my wife the moment she chose him." I decided to pay Emily a visit. Not to scream or shout, I was past that. I just wanted her to see, face to face, that her lies were finally catching up to her. Her sister's house was on the edge of town, a small, run-down place with peeling paint and a yard full of weeds. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw Emily's car parked out front. I knocked on the door, and after a long pause, she opened it. She looked like hell, her hair unkempt, dark circles under her eyes, wearing the same clothes I'd last seen her in. "James," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "What are you doing here?" I stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. "I wanted to see how you're holding up." She flinched at the sarcasm in my tone. "Please, can we just talk?" I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I laughed bitterly. Didn't mean for it to happen? You lied to me. You stole from me. You slept with that scumbag under my roof, Emily. Don't you dare stand there and play innocent." She sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "He told me we'd be happy, that we'd start over. I didn't know he was using me." "Then you're an idiot," I said bluntly. "But I think you knew. You just didn't care." Her head shot up, tears streaming down her face. "James, please." I lost everything. The house, the money, you've destroyed me. I stared at her for a long moment, feeling absolutely nothing. You destroyed yourself. I just pulled back the curtain so everyone else could see it. Her sobs grew louder, but I turned and walked toward the door. Before leaving, I looked back at her one last time. By the way, I said quietly, the cops are looking into those financial records you signed. You might want to start thinking about your next move. Prison Orange isn't a good look on you. Her face turned white. James. I didn't wait to hear the rest. I walked out, slamming the door behind me. That night, I sat on my porch again, watching the sun set over a life I was rebuilding piece by piece. Ben was about to be hauled off in handcuffs. Emily was drowning in the mess she'd created. And me? I was free. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about restoring balance, taking back what was mine and ensuring they paid for their betrayal. The storm was almost over, but there was one last strike of lightning left to come. The fire I'd started was spreading, and there was no stopping it now. By the next morning, Tom's updates came faster than I could read them. Ben Carter was in free fall. His biggest clients had pulled their contracts, his accounts were frozen, and rumors of his arrest were already circulating. He wasn't just broke, he was finished. I sat back in my chair and exhaled slowly, letting the satisfaction sink in. But this wasn't the end. Not yet. There was still one final blow to deliver, and it had to come from me. Emily had thrown everything we built into the fire for a loser like Ben. She didn't deserve pity, but I wanted her to see what happens when you back the wrong horse. I wanted her to witness the collapse of the world she thought she could escape to. So, I made a call to Tom. Where's Ben now? Tom chuckled on the other end of the line. Carter's at his office. He's holed up, trying to salvage what's left of his life. You want me to keep an eye on him? No, I replied. I'll handle this one myself. The office building where Ben had run his scams looked different in the daylight, pathetic, like a cracked facade that could barely hold itself together. I parked across the street, watching the entrance for a moment. I could see him through the window, frantic, pacing, making call after call to whoever was still dumb enough to answer. It was almost pitiful. Almost. When I walked inside, I didn't bother announcing myself. I pushed open his office door hard enough to make it slam against the wall. Ben spun around, his phone still pressed to his ear. His face went pale when he saw me. You, he spat, slamming the phone down. What the hell do you want now? Me? I said, stepping toward him. I'm just here to check on you, Ben. You look like you're having a rough day. He clenched his fists, but there was no fight in his eyes. He was cornered, and he knew it. You did this to me, he growled. You ruined everything. I laughed, low and cold. I didn't ruin anything, Ben. You did. You scammed the wrong people, betrayed the wrong man, and thought you could walk away with my wife and my money. You dug your grave, I just handed you the shovel. His nostrils flared, his chest heaving with each breath. I'll come back from this, he said, his voice trembling with false bravado. People like me always do. Not this time, I said sharply. Your clients know what you are. The cops are closing in on you. And Emily? I smirked, twisting the knife. She's going down with you. You used her as a pawn, and now she's just another name in your dirty little schemes. She'll be lucky if she doesn't end up in prison next to you. Ben's face crumpled, the bravado disappearing in an instant. You son of a... He lunged at me, his fists swinging wildly. I'd been waiting for it. I sidestepped his first punch and grabbed him by the collar, slamming him into the wall hard enough to rattle the cheap drywall. Listen to me, you little parasite, I hissed, my face inches from his. This ends today. Your life, your scams, everything, you're done. And if you ever come near me again, or try to crawl out of this hole, I'll make sure you regret it." He struggled, but I shoved him back into the chair behind his desk. He sat there, defeated, his face red with humiliation and rage. "You think you've won," he muttered weakly. "I don't think," I said, straightening my jacket. "I know." I turned and walked out, letting the door slam behind me. When I got back to my truck, I pulled out my phone and sent a message to Tom. "Ben's done. It's time for the cops to take over. Pull the trigger." Tom's reply came within seconds, on it. By the time I got home, the sun was starting to dip low on the horizon. I poured myself a glass of whiskey and sat in the living room, waiting. At 6:30 p.m., my phone buzzed. A text from Tom. "It's over. Carter's been arrested. Fraud, embezzlement, wire theft. The works." I smiled to myself, taking a slow sip. One down. One to go. I turned on the TV, flipping through channels until I found the local news. And there it was, Ben Carter's mugshot plastered across the screen, the headline screaming, "Local businessman arrested in multimillion-dollar fraud scandal." I leaned back and watched as the anchor recounted the details of his downfall, his clients turning against him, the evidence piling up, the financial schemes unraveling. It was everything I'd worked for, playing out on live television for the whole town to see. But the best part? They showed a clip of Emily, caught on camera outside her sister's house. Reporters surrounded her, shouting questions. "Did you know what Ben Carter was doing? Were you involved in the fraud? Are you under investigation?" Her face was pale, her eyes wide and darting as she stammered out, "No comment. I didn't. I don't know anything." She looked exactly how I wanted her to look, broken, exposed, and alone. I turned off the TV and drained my glass. Emily and Ben thought they could ruin me. They thought they could take what was mine and walk away laughing. But now, Ben was in jail, his empire reduced to rubble, and Emily was drowning in the mess she helped create. I didn't just win. I made sure they lost. And I wasn't done yet. It was late. The kind of late where the world feels quiet, almost too still, like something is holding its breath. I sat in my truck, engine running, parked outside a dingy motel on the edge of town. The neon vacancy sign flickered above the building, casting long, jittery shadows across the gravel lot. I already knew who was inside. Emily. She had nowhere else to go. Her sister threw her out, Ben was sitting in a cell awaiting trial, and the world she'd gambled everything on had turned to dust in her hands. A week ago, this would have given me satisfaction. Hell, I might have even smiled. But now? Now, it was just business. One last meeting to put this whole miserable story to rest. I killed the engine and stepped out of the truck, the gravel crunching beneath my boots as I walked toward the door marked 12. The blinds were drawn, and the room was dark except for a faint flicker of light coming from a TV. I knocked twice. There was a pause, then the shuffling of footsteps. When the door creaked open, Emily stood there, and for a second, I almost didn't recognize her. Her hair was a mess, her face pale and hollow, her eyes red from crying. She was wearing a sweatshirt that was 2 sizes too big, probably the only clean thing she had left. She stared at me like she'd seen a ghost. "James," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Are you going to let me in, or are we going to do this on the porch?" She hesitated, then stepped aside, letting me pass. The room was exactly what I expected, a small bed with a stained comforter, an old TV buzzing in the corner, and a suitcase half unpacked on the floor. I looked around, then turned back to face her. "This is where you've ended up," I said, my tone flat. "From our house, to this." She flinched at my words but didn't say anything. "Sit," I said, nodding toward the bed. She obeyed without a word, lowering herself onto the edge of the mattress. I remained standing, looming over her like the weight of her decisions. "You know why I'm here," I said finally. She looked up at me, tears forming in her eyes. "James. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I laughed bitterly. "You didn't mean for this to happen? You planned it. You schemed behind my back. You stole from me, and you crawled into bed with a man who's now rotting in a jail cell. Don't insult me by pretending you're innocent." Her shoulders shook as she buried her face in her hands, sobbing softly. "I was stupid. I was selfish, but I loved you, James." "I did." "Loved me?" I repeated, my voice cutting through her like a blade. "You don't betray someone you love. You don't rip their life apart and leave them to pick up the pieces. You didn't love me, Emily. You loved what I gave you, the stability, the safety, the life you could never build for yourself." She looked up again, her face streaked with tears. "Please, James. I don't have anyone else. I don't know what to do. I'll do anything, anything to make this right." For a moment, I said nothing. I just stared at her, this broken, pathetic woman who used to be my wife. "You can't make this right," I said finally. "Some mistakes can't be fixed." "But..." "I've already spoken to my lawyer," I interrupted. "The divorce will be finalized in a matter of weeks. You'll get what the law says you're entitled to, but that's it. No more handouts. No more safety nets. You're on your own now, Emily." Her mouth fell open, her expression crumbling into pure despair. "James, please. I can't do this alone." I shook my head. "That's not my problem anymore." I turned toward the door, but before I left, I paused and looked back at her one last time. "You want to know the worst part, Emily?" I asked quietly. She didn't respond. She just stared at me, broken and empty. "The worst part is that I don't hate you. I don't even care enough to hate you. You're just nothing to me now." Her lip trembled, and she let out a strangled sob. I didn't wait to hear the rest. I walked out of the room, slamming the door behind me. When I got back to the truck, I sat there for a moment, staring at the steering wheel. I expected to feel something, anger, relief, even sadness, but there was nothing. Just emptiness. I started the engine and drove away without looking back. A week later, the divorce was finalized. I signed the papers in my lawyer's office without hesitation. Sam handed me a copy, and as I glanced at Emily's signature on the dotted line, I felt a strange sense of peace. It was over. Ben was in prison, his empire in ruins. Emily was alone, penniless, and forgotten. And me? I was free. I didn't win because I ruined their lives. I won because I reclaimed mine. That evening, I sat on the porch of my new house, a smaller, simpler place on the edge of town. The air was cool, the sky streaked with orange and purple as the sun set. I took a sip of whiskey and let the quiet settle over me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel bitter. I didn't feel broken. I felt like a man who'd survived the worst and come out stronger on the other side. People like Emily and Ben live their lives chasing chaos, thinking they're smarter than everyone else. But in the end, chaos always catches up with them. And I was there to make sure it did. I leaned back in my chair, watching the horizon. The storm was over. And I was still standing.